Hello, I'm Marcin Bużański and you're watching World Talks. A month has passed since the US launched its epic Fury operation against Iran. What is the current status of the conflict and what are the predictions for the future? To talk about it, we're joined by Marcin Bużański, Director at the Center for Diplomacy and Negotiation at Collegium Civitas. Good evening.
Good evening. Very glad to be with you.
So, let's start with difficult questions. What was the US able to achieve in a month of bombing Iran's military sites and regime's officials as well?
Well, it's a month has passed, and I think the question, what has one achieved, really should be connected to what have been the objectives of the invasion, of the attack, and I think that's still not really clear. We've had various conflicting messages coming from the White House, starting from an objective of regime change, then moving to degradation of all military capabilities of Iran, including the Navy, including ballistic missiles, the dissemination de facto of the whole command and control structure of the Iranian forces, of the Revolutionary Guard and Iranian leadership, as well as de facto destroying completely the Iranian nuclear program. So if we take all of those into consideration, probably the only thing which can be stated with full confidence that has been achieved is the destruction, or almost all destruction, of the Iranian military navy. But considering other things, I think we're very far from something we could call a successful achievement of objectives that have been stated by the US and of course by Israel. Well, we are in I think a very difficult situation when it comes to this conflict, because it seems that most of the scenarios forward are actually pointing to escalation rather than winding down and stopping this war.
I'm sure Donald Trump would disagree with you. Why wasn't the US able to topple the regime, as you said? Because we all remember these pictures from before the epic Fury started, right? There was sort of an enthusiasm in the streets of Tehran and allegedly other Iranian cities that people really wanted to do something about the Ayatollahs. So what happened now?
Well, look, I think that some images of initial enthusiasm we could see transmitted from the streets of Tehran. It was mainly the death of a tyrant that the Ayatollah was for many Iranians. But we must understand that this is only for part of the society, and actually a part of the society that is, frankly speaking, a minority. For many other parts of Iranians, the Ayatollah who was killed is now a martyr, which in Shia Islam actually is an important, a very important figure. For many others, I would say the majority, which is would want to get rid of an oppressive regime, would want a Iran that's prospering economically and which has much more individual freedoms. Well, for them right now, there's simply put no opportunity and capability to rise up, because they are not organized. They would risk dying in the streets in the tens of thousands. I mean, we've already seen that after the protest in the beginning of the year. And what we have now in Iran is a regime which, yes, is extremely weakened, with many of its leadership killed, but it's still a regime which commands the majority, the absolute majority of security forces, which are in a quite good shape. And we're talking here about hundreds of thousands of armed men which are loyal to the regime. And even if there are fractures in the regime happening, meaning the Ayatollah regime, the secular one, the most likely change is for a more secular regime, but as oppressive and as hostile to the US and towards Israel. So frankly speaking, this is not much of a change when it comes to a true possibility for changing of the regime. I think what will able to see right now is a consolidation within the regime and the country, of course, that is on a war footing, meaning it's so much more difficult to go out to the streets and protest and look for change when people are more considered with survival. And the country is going towards an economic downfall and potential humanitarian catastrophe. So it's a very difficult objective to achieve. I can't see this happening in the near future. Of course, long term, it's hard to predict.
I see. Now, as you say, the regime is weakened but not broken yet. But is this regime more willing to negotiate with the Americans than in the beginning of the Epic Fury operation?
Well, I think this is a clear picture of why this whole operation was ill-conceived from the beginning, because if it had been very focused on destroying some of the capabilities, pushing, building leverage for the Iranians to negotiate, it could have been a bit more successful. But something else has happened. The objective to destroy the regime was put forward. It was attempted. It's still in play. So the Iranians, frankly speaking, don't have that much faith and don't have trust to negotiate with the US. For them now, it's a question of survival. And for survival, Iran holds the cards, unfortunately. They can maintain their position for a very long time. They can fight asymmetrically. They've been preparing for this for decades. Their command and control structures are very strongly decentralized. They can continue attacking with drones. They can still continue attacking with some ballistic capabilities. These have been destroyed, yes, but it is assessed that at least 1/3 of the stockpiles are still available and hidden. And if Iran only shoots a rocket or two a week to Israel and to its neighboring states, it is still holding the region hostage. It can keep closing the Strait of Hormuz almost indefinitely if it wants to. The US cannot secure the Strait of Hormuz without a major military ground operation, not just naval, but ground operation, which would turn the whole war to a completely different stage and, frankly speaking, be a very, very disastrous politically operation for the United States. So if you consider all of this and Iranians' negotiating position, well, it puts out extremely strong demands. And we can now see two officially stated negotiating positions from the US side, from Iranian side, which are worlds apart. Now, there are efforts to bring this closer. Pakistan is the mediating country right now. But when it comes to a de facto possible deal that would resolve all those issues, I cannot see it happening. And Iran is playing for the long game. Now, since it had been attacked, since so much of its capabilities and leaders have been destroyed, it will be playing for survival, and it will be playing for hurting the US and their allies in the region and exerting enough pressure to really force a solution that guarantees its continued survival and will stop future attacks like this from happening. So they're really two very broad positions apart, and it's hard to see them coming closer without some kind of shifts of dynamics in this war, which tells us that we're most likely going to see a continued hostilities on both sides, and that's very bad news for Europe, and that's very bad news for the Middle East.
Right, now you say that Iran's ground forces count some several 100,000 soldiers, right? So what is the US counting for sending few thousand of their Marines to the region?
Well, this is designed for specific small territorial operations, primarily, I believe, towards a number of islands around Iran, which play a very important role when it comes to Iranian exports of oil. And these are particularly the Kark Island, which is higher up north in the Persian Gulf, and which Iran uses to export almost 90% of its oil, refine and then export from there. The US could take over that island. That is a possibility, and probably Iran wouldn't be able to stop them completely, but it would come at a cost, for sure, of American lives, and many of them. And if they do, the retaliation of Iran in terms of oil facilities in the Gulf is almost certain, and at a large scale. But the idea is here that if the US take control of the Kark Island, agreement, it could try to sort of barter with Iran to give back that control for keeping an open Hormuz Strait. So this is, I think, the thinking here. But that said, it's not just a question of taking over the island. You need to keep control of that, which will be an extremely hard operation. Then you might have some very targeted special forces operation that could go into Iran, for instance, to try to make sure that stockpiles of uranium are either secured or that any kind of key nuclear facilities are destroyed. So potentially after those kind of operations, you could come back and say, look, we've achieved that goal, right? So you add an idea for an off-ramp to move away. That's another possibility here. But these are numbers of troops that could only be used for this. This is definitely not an amount sufficient even to attempt a ground operation to secure the quite large territory around the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Now, let's look at the war from a different perspective. From the perspective of the Lebanese. Is the Israeli ground operation in Lebanon a necessary one for the success of this American operation in Iran?
Well, frankly speaking, they are two different things. I mean, they are connected, but from a military objective, Hezbollah has been very strongly diminished in capabilities to hurt to hurt Israel. But of course, they responded with some rockets coming in, which I think was expected and planned by many in Israeli leadership. And they see this as an opportunity to destroy even further Hezbollah, but also potentially to move further with controlling territory which is in the buffer zone between Israel and Lebanon. And this is something that Netanyahu has already said they're going to continue and expand. So we're potentially going to see millions of Lebanese, which will be displaced by those operations. So we're talking about another refugee wave. Already the economy in Lebanon is in shambles. And basically the whole power dynamics in Lebanon, the power sharing agreement hangs on a thread. So this is a very risky move because it could move Lebanon back to the state of civil war that we've seen before 1990 with, again, disastrous consequences. But from Israel's perspective, well, they can keep destroying their enemy, which is Hezbollah, keep building a bigger buffer zone. And finally, specifically for Netanyahu, this is also another front. And the more fronts he has, and here I mean Iran, also Gaza and Lebanon, and the more his apparatus is engaged in gaining territory and destroying enemies, this is political fuel for his campaign. I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu does an early election, not in the fall, but already in June, trying to gain on those operations, gain political points, and win another term. So I think this is also a big part of Israel's planning here, and we're still going to see the hostilities, the fighting continue in Lebanon, I think, for weeks to come.
So the forecasts for the Middle East don't look good at all. Marcin Bużański, Director at the Center for Diplomacy and Negotiation at Collegium Civitas, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
And thank you for watching and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.